You wake up, and for exactly 3 seconds, something stirs. Not excitement, you'd never call it that. Something quieter, something almost embarrassing in its smallness, like a child pressing their face against a window they've already been told they can't go through. And then you shut it down. You get up, you make coffee, you check your phone with the same practiced detachment you've worn for years. And when the notifications come in, the automated ones, the few real ones, you respond quickly, warmly, efficiently. Thanks so much, means a lot. And then you keep moving, because keeping moving is what you do. Because stillness on a day like today feels like standing in a room waiting to see if anyone shows up. And you learned a long time ago not to wait in rooms like that. So you treat it like a Tuesday, and everyone around you says, "Oh, she's so low maintenance," or "He's so chill, not like other people about their birthdays." And you smile because yes, that's the version you built, and it works, and it costs you almost nothing. Almost. Because here's what's actually true, and I need you to stay with this, because this is the part nobody says out loud. You don't not care. You care so much it frightened you. Somewhere, buried beneath years of self-sufficiency and preemptive disappointment management, is a version of you that wanted the fuss, that wanted someone to remember without being reminded, that wanted to walk into a room and feel, just once, without guilt, without shrinking, without immediately pivoting to make sure everyone else was comfortable, that this day existed to honor the fact that you exist. But wanting that felt like standing exposed in the middle of a field. And you are not someone who stands exposed. You are someone who builds roofs, walls, contingency plans. You are someone who stopped needing things before anyone could fail to provide them. And that, right there, is the paradox that this video is about. Because the very strategy that protected you from disappointment has become the architecture of your loneliness. The wall you built to keep the hurt out is the same wall keeping the love out. The thing that saved you is now quietly starving you. Let's name what this actually is, because it deserves a name. Psychologists call the early version emotional parentification. Not always the obvious kind, not always the child cooking dinner at 8 years old. Sometimes it's subtler. Sometimes it's the child who sensed, with extraordinary accuracy, that the adults around them were already at capacity, that their big feelings were an inconvenience, that joy, expressed loudly and demandingly, as children are supposed to express it, created friction. And so they learned to pre-manage, to tone it down, to celebrate quietly, if at all, so no one had to be burdened by their brightness. This installs something in the nervous system called hypervigilance of need, a state of constant low-grade monitoring of how much emotional space you are occupying. The brain, wired for belonging above all else, runs a constant calculation. If my needs become visible, do I become too much? If I ask for this, will I be tolerated? And over time, the calculation speeds up until it becomes reflex. You stop asking before you even register that you want it to ask. Then there's avoidant attachment, the psychological fingerprint left behind when early caregivers were emotionally unavailable, inconsistently present, or subtly overwhelmed. Avoidant individuals do not stop needing closeness. That is a myth. They develop an unconscious belief that closeness requires self-erasure as its entry fee. So they become extraordinarily capable, self-reliant, low maintenance by design, and their nervous system learns to experience vulnerability, the very thing that could finally connect them, as a 5-alarm threat. And neurologically, what gets wired in is a suppression of what researchers call self-referential processing, the brain's ability to sit comfortably inside moments that center you. Celebration, visibility, receiving. These are supposed to activate the reward system, but in a nervous system trained for self-erasure, they activate threat responses instead. The discomfort you feel when someone sings happy birthday too enthusiastically, that's not a personality quirk. That is a wound dressed up as a preference. Carl Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And for the person who treats their birthday like a normal day, complete self-acceptance includes accepting this: you have been grieving something you were never allowed to openly grieve. There is a particular kind of sorrow that lives in the uncelebrated. Not dramatic sorrow, not the kind that writes poetry or calls a friend at midnight. The quiet kind. The kind that surfaces at 11:58 p.m., when the day is almost over, in a feeling you can barely catch before you rationalize it away. A feeling that sounds, if you listen very closely, something like, "Did I matter today? Does the fact of me, not my usefulness, not my reliability, not my ability to hold everything together, does that mean something to anyone?" That question is not vanity. It is the most human question there is. But you've been calling it vanity for years. You've been calling the need for celebration self-indulgence, calling the ache for acknowledgement immaturity. You've been so committed to the story that you don't need this, that you have effectively gaslit the most tender part of yourself into silence. And the cost, the real cost, is not that your birthday passes quietly. The cost is that you begin to apply this same logic everywhere. You stop asking for things in relationships. You stop raising your hand for recognition at work. You preemptively minimize your wins, your pain, your needs, your presence. You become someone who exists largely for other people's comfort because your own comfort was trained out of you so young you genuinely can't locate where it went. This is not strength. This is the coping strategy wearing strength's clothing. And it does not stay inside the birthday. It moves through everything like water through stone. You might be the person who can articulate everyone else's needs with stunning precision and goes blank when someone asks what you need. Not because you're selfless, because self-knowledge was never safe to develop. You become the one who over-delivers at work, consistently exceeds expectations, and then deflects every compliment with such automatic speed that the moment of being seen never fully lands. You find yourself in relationships where you are the dependable one, the stable one, the one who holds the emotional infrastructure together. And somewhere underneath that role is a quiet rage you don't let yourself feel, because feeling it would require admitting how much you've been giving without receiving. You might set fierce professional boundaries, time, contracts, deliverables, but have almost no ability to set emotional ones, because emotional boundaries require first believing your emotional needs are worth protecting. You keep yourself perpetually busy, not because you love busyness, because stillness is where the ache lives. And the ache is the thing you've been outrunning since you were small enough that it first took root. And you repeat across decades the central pattern. You make yourself easy to have around by making yourself hard to truly reach. You are present everywhere and known almost nowhere. These are not character flaws. They are not who you are. They are the logical adaptations of a nervous system that learned, in formative conditions it did not choose, that visible need was a liability. They are coping strategies that calcified, and calcified coping strategies can be softened. Healing does not begin with a grand gesture. It begins with one act of unbearable honesty. It begins with witnessing, a concept foundational to trauma-informed therapy, not fixing, not reframing, not immediately pivoting to gratitude, simply turning toward the child who stopped asking and saying with full seriousness, "What happened to you made sense given what surrounded you, but it was not the truth about your worth." This is what John Bradshaw called inner child reparenting, the slow, deliberate, sometimes painfully mundane practice of giving yourself now what was missing then, marking your own milestones, letting yourself want things out loud, telling one person what you actually hope for, and staying in your body long enough to receive it. This is also the work Carl Jung called shadow integration, reclaiming the parts of yourself you learned to exile, the part that is allowed to want to be celebrated, that is allowed to be the center of something without immediately shrinking, that is allowed to receive without converting the receipt into service. The poet Nayyirah Waid wrote, "You do not have to be grateful for things that try to diminish you." And one of the things that diminished you, that you may have never identified as diminishment, was learning to celebrate your existence only in private, only in theory, only when it costs no one anything. So this is the practice. Let someone make it a thing. Sit in the discomfort of being celebrated for 3 full seconds before you redirect. Ask for one specific thing, not something practical, something personal. And when the birthday passes, whether loudly or quietly, do not measure your worth by the attendance. Because the goal was never to need more from others, the goal is to stop being the one person in your life most committed to your own invisibility. You were never too much. You were in rooms not yet big enough to hold you. The work is not to become someone who needs less. The work is to become someone who finally believes they deserve more. And if something in this reached you, if this found the part of you that's been quietly pretending, share it. Someone else out there is spending their birthday being very, very fine. And they are not fine. And they deserve to know they are not alone.